The sound of silence can be deafening, especially when it comes from the one person who should remember the day you brought them into this world. My name is Mildred Thompson, and at 73 years old, I never imagined I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, erasing my only son from my will. But sometimes life forces you to make choices you never thought possible. Let me tell you how a forgotten birthday changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in September when I woke up with that familiar flutter of excitement in my chest. September 15th, my 73rd birthday. I had been looking forward to this day for weeks, not because I particularly enjoyed getting older, but because I hoped, just maybe, this year would be different. You see, my son Harold, we called him Harry, had forgotten my birthday for the past 3 years running. Each year, I made excuses for him. He's busy with work, I'd tell myself. He has his own family to think about. But deep down, those forgotten days cut deeper than any knife ever could. I remember the day Harry was born like it was yesterday. It was a difficult labor that lasted 18 hours. I was just 22 then, barely more than a child myself. But the moment they placed that wrinkled, screaming bundle in my arms, I knew my life had found its purpose. His father, God rest his soul, had tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "He's perfect, Millie," he whispered. "Just perfect." And Harry was perfect. He was my miracle baby after 2 heartbreaking miscarriages that nearly broke me. For years, I had prayed for a child, lighting candles at St. Mary's every Sunday, bargaining with God in ways that now seem almost desperate. When Harry finally came into our lives, I promised myself I would be the best mother anyone could be. I kept that promise through his childhood illnesses, staying up all night when he had pneumonia at age 5, holding his fevered body against mine and singing lullabies until dawn broke. I kept it through his teenage rebellions, when he came home drunk at 16 and I cleaned up his mess without saying a word to his father, protecting him from a punishment that might have been too harsh. I kept that promise when he left for college at 18, sending care packages every month filled with his favorite chocolate chip cookies and hand-knitted sweaters. I kept it when he graduated and moved 3 states away for his job, calling him every Sunday evening at exactly 7 o'clock, even when our conversations grew shorter and more strained. If you're enjoying this story of a mother's love and heartbreak, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us share more real-life stories that touch the heart. But somewhere along the way, the calls became less frequent. The visits home stretched from every holiday to just Christmas, then to just every other Christmas. Harry got married when he was 35, a lovely ceremony that I helped pay for, despite my modest pension. His wife, Janet, was a nice enough girl, though she never seemed particularly warm toward me. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, little Emma and baby Thomas. I sent birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, Christmas presents carefully chosen from catalogs, and letters that often went unanswered. When I did see them, usually during those increasingly rare visits, the children barely knew me. I was just Grandma Millie, a stranger who appeared occasionally with gifts and stories they had no interest in hearing. The years passed, and I found myself living in an echo chamber of memories. My husband Robert had passed away 8 years ago, leaving me alone in our small 2-bedroom house with nothing but photographs and the hope that my son might fill some of the emptiness that seemed to grow larger each day. So when I woke up that Tuesday morning, my birthday morning, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe Harry would remember. Maybe he would call, or send a card, or even surprise me with a visit. I made myself a special breakfast. 2 eggs, over easy, the way Robert used to make them, with a slice of the good bread I saved for special occasions. I even put on my best dress, the blue one with the tiny flowers that Harry had complimented years ago. I sat by the phone, reading my romance novel, but keeping one ear alert for its ring. The morning turned to afternoon. The afternoon stretched into evening. The phone remained silent. At around 7 o'clock, I finally called him. My hands shook as I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before he answered, and I could hear children laughing in the background. "Hi, Mom," he said, and I could tell he was distracted. "What's up?" "Hi, sweetheart," I managed, my voice barely steady. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "That's nice, Mom. Listen, can I call you back? We're in the middle of dinner, and Emma has soccer practice afterward." My heart felt like it was cracking down the middle. "Of course, dear. Don't let me keep you." "Thanks, Mom. Talk to you later." The line went dead, and I sat there holding the phone long after the dial tone began buzzing in my ear. He hadn't remembered, again. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my empty bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the birthdays I had celebrated for Harry. The elaborate parties when he was little, with homemade cakes shaped like trains and dinosaurs. The teenage years when he pretended not to care, but I caught him smiling at his friends' admiration of the gifts I'd carefully chosen. The way he used to hug me so tight on those days and say, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." When had I stopped being the best? When had I become so forgettable? The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I called my lawyer, Mr. Peterson, and made an appointment. "Mrs. Thompson," he said when I arrived at his office that Thursday afternoon. "How can I help you today?" "I want to change my will," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Peterson had known me for 15 years, ever since Robert and I first drew up our wills. He was a kind man with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and I could see the concern in his face as he opened my file. "What kind of changes are we talking about, Mrs. Thompson?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Harold from my will. Entirely." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but to his credit, he didn't ask questions immediately. He simply reached for a legal pad and pen. "Are you sure about this decision, Mrs. Thompson? It's quite a significant change." "I'm sure," I said, though my hands were trembling in my lap. "I want everything to go to charity instead. St. Mary's, church, the children's hospital, and the animal shelter where I volunteer. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about family, love, and the difficult choices we sometimes have to make." As Mr. Peterson drew up the new documents, I told him everything. I told him about the forgotten birthdays, the unreturned calls, the grandchildren who barely knew my name. I told him about the loneliness that had become my constant companion, and the realization that I had been loving someone who had forgotten how to love me back. "You know," Mr. Peterson said gently as I signed the papers, "you can always change this again if circumstances improve with your son." I nodded, but deep down I knew that ship had sailed. The damage wasn't just about one forgotten birthday. It was about years of gradual abandonment, of becoming an afterthought in the life of the person I had loved most. The new will was finalized on October 3rd. I walked out of that office feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than I had in years. Lighter because I had taken control of my own destiny. Heavier because I had officially acknowledged what I had been denying for so long. My son had moved on from me long ago. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. 3 weeks after, I changed my will. I received a phone call that would change everything. It was Janet, Harry's wife, and she was crying. "Millie," she sobbed into the phone, "something terrible has happened. Harry's been in an accident." My heart stopped. Despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger and the disappointment, he was still my son. He was still that perfect baby I had held in my arms 51 years ago. "What happened?" I whispered. "A drunk driver ran a red light downtown. Harry's in intensive care. They don't know if he's going to wake up. I was in my car within 10 minutes, driving the 3 hours to the hospital where my son lay unconscious, machines keeping him alive. Janet met me in the waiting room, her eyes red and swollen. The children were with her mother, she explained. She looked so young and fragile, nothing like the confident woman who had seemed to keep me at arm's length all these years. The doctors say the next 48 hours are critical, she whispered. Millie, I'm so scared. I held her as she cried, this woman who had never seemed to need anyone, least of all me. And in that moment, I realized that perhaps I had been wrong about some things. Perhaps the distance I felt hadn't been entirely Harry's fault. Perhaps Janet had been protecting her family from what she perceived as my overwhelming neediness, my desperate attempts to remain relevant in their lives. He's going to be okay, I told her, though I wasn't sure I believed it, myself. Harry's strong. He's a fighter. We sat in that sterile waiting room for 3 days. Janet and I took turns holding vigil by Harry's bedside, watching the rise and fall of his chest, listening to the steady beeping of the machines that were keeping him alive. During those long hours, Janet and I talked more than we had in this entire 15 years since she'd married my son. She told me about Harry's work stress, how he'd been putting in 70-hour weeks trying to make partner at his law firm. She told me about Emma's struggles in school, how she'd been getting bullied, and how Harry had been spending his evenings helping her with homework and building her confidence. She told me about baby Thomas's developmental delays, how they'd been going to specialists and therapy appointments several times a week. He talks about you all the time, Janet said on the second night, as we sat in the dimly lit ICU room. He feels terrible about missing your birthday again. He had it written on his calendar, circled in red, but that day he had to rush Thomas to the emergency room because he was having trouble breathing. My heart clenched. I didn't know. Harry didn't want to worry you. He said you'd been through enough with Grandpa Robert's death and everything. He was going to call you the next day. But then Emma had her crisis at school, and then work got crazy and... Janet's voice trailed off. Time just got away from us. It always does. I stared at my son's face, so still and pale against the white hospital pillow. He looked younger somehow, more like the boy I remembered. I reached out and took his hand, surprised by how cold it felt. I changed my will, I whispered to Janet. 3 weeks ago, I removed Harry from it entirely. Janet's eyes widened, but she didn't pull away. Oh, Millie. I was so hurt, I continued, so angry. I felt forgotten, abandoned. I thought he didn't care about me anymore. He does care, Janet said softly. He loves you so much. He's not good at showing it. He's like his father. That way, Robert was the same, wasn't he? All that love locked up inside, but never quite knowing how to express it. She was right. Robert had been exactly the same way. He had loved me deeply, but he showed it through actions rather than words. He showed it by working extra hours to buy me the little luxuries I mentioned wanting. He showed it by fixing things around the house before I even noticed they were broken. He showed it by holding me close at night, even when we were too tired to talk. Maybe Harry was showing his love in ways I hadn't recognized. Maybe those brief phone calls weren't dismissive. Maybe they were his way of checking in while juggling an overwhelming life. Maybe the infrequent visits weren't about not caring. Maybe they were about protecting me from the chaos that had become his daily reality. On the third day, as I sat alone with Harry while Janet went home to shower and check on the children, something extraordinary happened. His eyes fluttered open. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I leaned closer, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "I'm sorry," he said, his words slurred but clear enough. "I forgot your birthday again." "Shh," I whispered, smoothing his hair back from his forehead the way I used to when he was small. Don't worry about that now." "No," he said, trying to sit up but too weak to manage it. "I need to tell you. I had it planned. I was going to take you to dinner at Morrison's. You know, that place you like with the good pot roast. I had it all arranged. But then Thomas got sick, and I had to take him to the hospital, and then everything fell apart." "Janet told me," I said gently. "It's okay." "It's not okay," Harry said, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. "I've been a terrible son. I've been so caught up in my own life that I forgot about the person who gave me life in the first place." "You haven't been terrible," I said, though part of me had thought exactly that just a few weeks ago. "You've been living. You've been taking care of your family, working hard, being a good father. That's what you're supposed to do." "But I should have made time for you too," he said. "After Dad died, I should have been there more. I should have called more. I should have brought the kids to see you more often." I squeezed his hand. "We both made mistakes, Harry. I think I expected too much sometimes. I think I forgot that you have your own life to live." Over the next few days, as Harry slowly recovered, we had conversations that we should have had years ago. He told me about the pressure he felt to provide for his family, about the guilt he carried for not being the son he thought I deserved. I told him about the loneliness that had consumed me since his father's death, about the fear that I had become irrelevant in his life. "You could never be irrelevant to me," he said. "You're my mother. You're the person who taught me how to love, how to be strong, how to keep going when things get tough. Everything good about me came from you." If this story is touching your heart, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us what truly matters. It was during one of these conversations that I made another decision. I called Mr. Peterson from the hospital. "I want to change my will again," I told him. "Back to the original version?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want to do something different this time." The new will I had drawn up was more thoughtful than either of the previous versions. Yes, Harry was back in it, but so were the charities I had chosen. I divided my modest estate between my son and the organizations that had given my life meaning during my loneliest years. But more importantly, I included a letter to be read to Harry after my death. A letter that would tell him everything I had never been able to say while I was alive. But I didn't stop there. I also did something I had never done before. I started living my life for me, not just for the hope of connection with my son. I joined a book club at the library. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community center. I began volunteering more regularly at the animal shelter, where the dogs and cats didn't care if I was lonely or forgotten. They just cared that I showed up with love and treats. And slowly, gradually, my relationship with Harry began to change, too. Instead of waiting for him to call, I started calling him with specific purposes. "I'm making your favorite apple pie for the church bake sale," I might say. "Do you want me to make an extra one for your family?" Instead of expecting him to visit, I started making plans to visit him, but with advance notice and for specific occasions. Most importantly, I started getting to know my grandchildren as individuals, rather than just extensions of my son. I learned that Emma loved horses and started sending her books about them. I discovered that Thomas was fascinated by trains and began collecting small train cars to give him whenever I saw him. The changes weren't dramatic or immediate. Harry still forgot to call sometimes. I still felt lonely on difficult days. But the sharp edge of resentment that had been cutting both of us for so long began to dull. 6 months after the accident, Harry surprised me with a visit on a random Tuesday. He showed up at my door with a bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, and a sheepish smile. "I know it's not your birthday or anything," he said. "I just wanted to see you." We spent the afternoon looking through old photo albums, and I watched Harry's face as he saw himself through the years. The gap-toothed kindergartner, the awkward teenager, the proud college graduate. In many of the pictures, my arms were around him, and I could see the love in my own eyes, even in those faded photographs. "I never doubted that you loved me," he said suddenly, "even when I was being stupid about staying in touch. I always knew you loved me. And I never doubted that you loved me either," I realized as I said it. I just forgot how to see it. A year later, on my 74th birthday, Harry didn't just remember, he planned. He brought the whole family to town and took me to Morrison's for that pot roast dinner he had missed the year before. Emma made me a handmade card with a drawing of the two of us on horses, and Thomas gave me a small wooden train that he had painted himself. "Happy birthday, Grandma Millie," Emma said, giving me a hug that felt different from the polite embraces of previous years. "Daddy told us all about how you used to make him birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs." "Would you like me to make you a dinosaur cake?" I asked her. "Could you make it a horse instead?" she asked hopefully. "I could make it a horse riding a dinosaur if you want," I said, and her eyes lit up with delight. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room surrounded by birthday cards and the lingering scent of the perfume Emma had picked out for me. I thought about the will that sat in Mr. Peterson's office, the one that reflected not anger or hurt, but love and thoughtfulness and hope. I thought about the choices we make when we're in pain, and how sometimes those choices can lead us to unexpected places of healing. I thought about the difference between being forgotten and being human, between being abandoned and being allowed to live an independent life. Most of all, I thought about love, how it can survive neglect and misunderstanding, and even change. How it can be buried under layers of hurt and disappointment and still emerge, blinking in the light, ready to grow again. My son didn't forget my birthday that year, but more importantly, I didn't forget who I was beyond being his mother. I was Mildred Thompson, a woman who had loved deeply and lost and loved again, who had made mistakes and learned from them, who had found ways to fill her own life with meaning and purpose. And if that's not a happy ending, I don't know what is. Thank you for staying with me through this journey of heartbreak and healing. If stories like this resonate with you, please subscribe to our channel and share your own experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone in our struggles.